Picture this. A swarm of Iranian drones fills the sky above the Strait of Hormuz. Merchant ships wait at the entrance to the world's most vital waterway. Oil prices have surged past $120 a barrel. The global economy is holding its breath. And somewhere above the haze and turmoil, a fighter jet that isn't even a stealth aircraft is doing something remarkable. It's addressing the entire problem, one strike at a time. That jet is the F-15E Strike Eagle, and right now, it's at the very center of what may be the most significant phase of Operation Epic Fury, America's ongoing campaign to dismantle Iran's war machine and reopen the Strait of Hormuz to the world. Welcome to Bradley Madden. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications because what's happening in the skies above Iran is moving fast, and we're going to make sure you don't miss a single development. Let's get into it. The U.S. military launched Operation Epic Fury on February 28, 2026, under direct orders from President Trump. According to the official statement published on the Department of Defense website on that date, the operation was designed to, quote, dismantle the Iranian regime's security apparatus, prioritizing locations that pose an imminent threat. 4 specific military objectives were outlined on Truth Social: preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, destroying its missile arsenal and production sites, degrading its proxy networks, and eliminating its navy. Behind those 4 stated goals, there was also a 5th implied political objective: regime change from within. What followed was a campaign that has already been described by analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies as the most sweeping U.S. military operation in the region in decades, far broader in scope than the targeted nuclear strikes of Operation Midnight Hammer, which were carried out in June 2025 using B-2 stealth bombers and which destroyed Iran's enrichment facilities at Fordo and Natanz. Epic Fury was different in every way. It was not a surgical strike. It was a systematic dismantling. In the opening hours alone, U.S. forces fired Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles at major Iranian naval facilities, including the base at Bandar Abbas at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz and military installations at Chabahar and Konarak in the Gulf of Oman. The Gulf International Forum reported that more than 120 Iranian naval vessels, spanning both the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, were destroyed or incapacitated in the opening phase. Those assets were struck while still moored at the pier, gone before they could move. By March 1st, as Flight Global reported, U.S. air operations had shifted from standoff cruise missile strikes to direct air operations over Tehran itself, signaling what analysts at Flashpoint described as the degradation of Iran's integrated air defenses over the capital. More than 110 fighter jets had flowed into the region from bases across North America and Europe, including F-16s, F-35s, F-15Es, A-10s, and at least 10 F-22 Raptors, a deployment that sent a very deliberate message to any regional power, including Russia, that might be watching from the sidelines, and believe us, they were watching. But while all of this was happening on the broader strategic stage, something very specific was unfolding on the Strait of Hormuz. And that's where things get really interesting. Here's where it becomes brilliant. Almost from the moment Operation Epic Fury began, Iran responded by doing the one thing it calculated the U.S. could not easily stop. It launched a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, not with warships, not with a traditional naval blockade. Iran's approach was far more cunning and far more dangerous, precisely because of how cheap it was to sustain. Think about what passes through the Strait of Hormuz every single year. Approximately 20% of the entire world's oil and liquefied natural gas. This is not a regional waterway. It is the lifeline of the global energy system, and Iran had its hand wrapped around it. The blockade was built on 3 pillars. First, sporadic anti-ship missile launches designed to make any crossing feel like a game of extreme chance. Second, fast attack craft, essentially weaponized speedboats capable of closing on a merchant vessel and blowing holes in its hull before any response could be mounted. And third, and most critically, Shahed drones, hundreds of them launched in swarms, targeting merchant ships, targeting Gulf state infrastructure, targeting anything that moved through or near the strait. As of March 16th, according to SOF News, more than 1,000 ships had been blocked from entering the Strait of Hormuz, with many of those vessels still idling near the entrance, waiting for safe passage that wasn't coming. Iran, meanwhile, was allowing ships from certain nations, China, Russia, and a handful of others, to pass through freely, a geopolitical stranglehold dressed up as a blockade. Oil prices, as we mentioned, rocketed past $120 per barrel and held there. The Ruwais industrial complex in Abu Dhabi, the Middle East's largest oil refinery, was struck by a drone and forced to shut down entirely. HSBC notified customers in Qatar that branches were closing immediately. 16 commercial vessels had been struck in the strait. The global economy was absorbing the shock in real time, and Iran was sustaining all of this with drones that cost between $20,000 and $50,000 to build. NPR noted those figures, pointing out that the cost varied depending on the specific Shahed model in question. America's interceptor missiles, by contrast, cost millions of dollars each. A Patriot missile runs around $4 million. Using a $4 million missile to down a $20,000 drone is not a sustainable equation for a prolonged campaign, and Iran knew it. Before the conflict began, Iran was estimated to have the production capacity to build 10,000 Shahed drones per month. 10,000. In the first week of Operation Epic Fury alone, Iran fired off more than 1,000 drones against Gulf states and merchant ships. Many more followed. The math was simple, and it was working in Iran's favor, unless the U.S. found a way to change the equation entirely. The answer: stop playing defense. Destroy the factory. And that, my friends, is exactly what America's F-15E Strike Eagles have been doing. Now, before we go any further, we want to take a second to thank you for being part of the Bradley Madden community. If you find this kind of deep dive analysis valuable, please make sure you're subscribed and that you've hit the notification bell. We're covering Operation Epic Fury with the detail it deserves, and you don't want to miss what's coming next in the story. Back to the F-15. The F-15E Strike Eagle is at its core a tactical all-weather fighter jet designed for exactly this kind of multi-role campaign. It can do the deep strike. It can do the close air interdiction. It can rain down precision munitions on hardened targets hundreds of miles inside enemy territory, and then wheel around and patrol a 24-mile-wide strait for hours hunting fast boats and drones. This is an aircraft built for versatility, and in Operation Epic Fury, that versatility is being pushed to its absolute limit. Let's talk specifications for a moment because they matter here. The F-15 can hit speeds of 1,175 mph, placing it firmly in the Mach 2 class. Its range is 3,450 miles, which means it can fly from a regional base, punch deep into Iranian territory, and return without breaking a sweat. The Strait of Hormuz itself is only about 100 miles long and roughly 24 miles across at its narrowest point. An F-15 can cover that entire strait in minutes and sustain patrols for hours. Its weapons payload is equally formidable. AIM-9 Sidewinders, AIM-120 AMRAAMs for air-to-air threats, GBU-54 bombs mounted on Joint Direct Attack munitions for precision ground strikes, and an internally mounted M61A1 20mm 6-barrel cannon with 940 rounds of ammunition capable of shredding drones in midair. It is a double threat. It is a triple threat, and in this conflict, it's been unleashed at full capability. We saw the clearest demonstration of what the F-15's production strike mission looks like when on March 24th, news broke that U.S. air power had destroyed a drone engine manufacturing plant in the city of Karaj. This was not a symbolic target. The Karaj facility built the turbojet engines used in Iran's Shahed drones, along with a range of other aviation components. It was a critical node in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' ability to maintain its swarm strategy over the Strait of Hormuz. Military provided the before and after imagery. Satellite pictures taken on March 6 showed the plant still intact and fully operational. Fast forward to the date of reporting, and the facility was a crater obliterated. A likely F-15 strike reduced a key pillar of Iran's drone supply chain to rubble in a single sortie. And this is the strategy. The Al Jazeera Center for Studies has pointed out that it is not just the drones themselves that the F-15 can target. It excels at destroying the means of production, and it can then redeploy to the strait to intercept the remaining drones in Iran's dwindling stockpile. Every production facility that goes up in smoke is one less month of Shahed manufacturing. Every turbojet engine line that burns is one more step toward the point where Iran's swarms run dry. The JINSA analysis published on March 16th noted that U.S. and Israeli airstrikes had by that date targeted key pillars of Iran's defense industrial base and inflicted severe damage across dozens of military research centers and production sites. Israeli intelligence analysts told Walla News that the strikes would inhibit Iran's ability to produce many categories of weapon systems for years. Years, not months. Years. Iran's production capacity for missiles had already been reduced to zero, its naval fleet had been gutted, and now its drone manufacturing infrastructure was being systematically shattered, strike by strike, facility by facility. Here's where it gets interesting. The F-15 could only do all of this because Iran's ability to stop it had essentially ceased to exist. In the early days of Operation Epic Fury, Iran's air defense network was still a real concern. The regime had invested heavily in a layered system, and the U.S. knew it. That's part of why 10 F-22 Raptors were deployed alongside the F-15s, not as a precaution against Iran's fighter jets, which had been all but destroyed by years of sanctions, but as a signal to any broader regional player that might consider intervening. But the layered air defense network Iran had built crumbled faster than almost anyone had predicted. The national interest described what remained of Iran's air defense posture as a strategy of shooting, wheeling out isolated mobile systems, firing a single missile, and moving before the launch position could be struck. That is not a defense network. That is desperation in uniform. On March 21st, Central Command Head Admiral Brad Cooper revealed that U.S. forces had flown more than 8,000 sorties in Iranian airspace since the beginning of Operation Epic Fury. 8,000. Iran, for all its rhetoric, has not been able to stop a single one. Its air defenses are gone. Its interceptors are gone. And without air defenses, there is nothing standing between America's F-15s and every production facility, every command center, every drone warehouse that Iran still has left. That is the new reality of Operation Epic Fury's current phase. The U.S. destroyed what Iran had. Now it is systematically destroying what Iran intended to build. But let's pause here for a moment because the human dimension of what is happening inside Iran right now deserves attention. Iran International reported on March 24th that the country may be approaching a genuine tipping point. The regime that launched this conflict was already weakened before Operation Epic Fury began. An economic crisis had been grinding down the Iranian population for years. The protests that originally sparked the broader escalation were rooted in that economic frustration. And now, with the military infrastructure of the regime being demolished from the air, with command and control networks burning with production facilities that kept the IRGC funded and armed being reduced to rubble. The question being asked in analytical circles is not whether Iran's people will rise. It is when. Iran International noted carefully and deliberately that oppressed people rarely move on the first sign of weakness in a regime. They move when command is thin, when leadership is destroyed, when the infrastructure and production that sustain the regime's power are shattered. By late March, 2 of those 3 conditions had already been met. And with F-15s continuing to fly sorties over Iranian production sites, the 3rd condition was being built towards strike by strike. Quiet streets in Tehran are not a sign of submission. They may simply be the quiet before a storm that the regime itself cannot stop, and the regime knows it. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbasi has reportedly signaled that his country is ready to negotiate and that he has received permission from the supreme leader to, as reports phrased it, close the issue quickly. How serious those overtures are, especially given that any deal would require concessions over the Strait of Hormuz, remains to be seen. The gap between what the U.S. is demanding and what Iran's hardliners are willing to concede still appears enormous. On March 22, President Trump issued a 48-hour ultimatum to Iran. Cease attacks in the Strait of Hormuz or U.S. forces would begin striking the country's energy infrastructure. The following day, Trump posted a message on Truth Social in all capitals. I have instructed the Department of Defense to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. A window had been opened, a small one, but a window nonetheless. Iran characteristically misread the situation. Rather than clearing the blockade as the U.S. demanded, Iran doubled down. The regime announced it would begin charging merchant ships fees of up to $2 million to pass through the strait. It threatened retaliatory strikes against regional powers if its energy infrastructure was hit, and its hardline elements renewed vows that the Strait of Hormuz would remain closed. Admiral Cooper addressed this directly on March 23, stating they're operating in a sign of desperation. In the last couple of weeks, they've attacked civilian targets very deliberately, more than 300 times. 300 deliberate attacks on civilian targets in 2 weeks. That is what a cornered regime looks like. That is what desperation sounds like. And then came the falsehood. On March 22, Iranian state media began circulating reports that its air defenses had shot down a U.S. F-15 over Iranian territory. The message was obvious. Iran was trying to tell its own population and the watching world that even in the midst of collapse, its military could still reach out and engage America's most capable fighter jets, that the fight wasn't over, that the regime still had power. U.S. Central Command responded the same day with a post on X that could not have been clearer. False. Rumors claim the Iranian regime recently shot down a U.S. F-15 over Iran. True, U.S. forces have flown more than 8,000 combat flights during Operation Epic Fury. No U.S. fighter aircraft have been shot down by Iran, not one in 8,000 sorties. Iran is fabricating victories to project strength to a population that can see with its own eyes. The smoke rising from one destroyed facility after another. The regime is lying to buy time, and meanwhile its own foreign minister is quietly signaling that it wants out of the fight. These are not the actions of a regime that believes it is winning. These are the actions of a regime that knows it is losing and is trying to manage the optics of its own unraveling. Now, there is one more dimension to this story that we haven't touched on yet, and it involves an unlikely partner that is extending a helping hand to U.S. forces in the Strait of Hormuz, one that knows Shahed drones better than almost anyone else on the planet because it has been fighting them for years: Ukraine. Ukrainian forces have been developing and deploying interceptor drone systems specifically designed to take down Shaheds at a fraction of the cost of traditional air defense missiles. These are asymmetric solutions born from years of fighting on a shoestring budget against the very same Iranian-built drones that are now plaguing the Strait of Hormuz. and according to reporting circulating in mid to late March, the U.S. and Ukraine have been in discussions about deploying those interceptor systems to support coalition operations in the Gulf region. Think about the strategic logic of this for a moment. America's F-15s are hitting the production facilities. They're destroying the supply chain. But in the meantime, Iran still has stockpiles, still has drones it can launch, still has the capacity, however diminishing, to keep disrupting shipping in the strait. Ukrainian interceptor drones built cheaply and designed specifically for this kind of drone versus drone engagement could provide a cost-effective defensive layer that complements the offensive strikes being carried out by the F-15s. While an F-15 costs around $29 million and a Patriot interceptor runs $4 million per shot, the Ukrainian drone-based intercept solutions reportedly operate at a fraction of that cost. You stop the Shaheds over the water with cheap interceptors. You destroy the factories that build those Shaheds with the F-15s. The equation, which was tilted so heavily in Iran's favor at the start of this conflict, is being reversed from both ends simultaneously. Let's zoom out and look at the full picture here because it is genuinely remarkable. At the start of Operation Epic Fury, Iran held what it believed was a winning hand. It had a blockade on the world's most critical energy waterway. It had drone production capacity that could output 10,000 units per month. It had a layered air defense system that theoretically threatened any aircraft operating in its territory. And it had regional proxy networks capable of striking U.S. bases and Gulf state infrastructure across a vast theater. 5 weeks into the campaign, that picture has been turned upside down. Iran's Navy has lost more than 120 vessels. Its missile production has been reduced to zero. Its air defense network has been shattered to the point where America's F-15s fly 8,000 sorties without losing a single aircraft. Its drone engine manufacturing in Karaj has been obliterated. Its defense industrial base has sustained damage that Israeli analysts say will take years to repair. Its military leadership has suffered decisive losses. Its economy is being further strangled, and the threat of internal uprising is mounting with every new plume of smoke that rises from another destroyed facility. And through it all, the F-15E Strike Eagle has been at the center of every critical phase. It struck the missile sites early on. It led the assault on production infrastructure. It patrols the Strait of Hormuz, hunting fast boats and drone swarms. It is the aircraft that Iran lied about shooting down precisely because it has never once been touched. It is the fighter that cannot be stopped because the system that might have stopped it no longer exists. Iran's regime is left with two moves. It can try to sustain the blockade and the drone campaign on dwindling stockpiles and shattered supply chains, hoping that the political cost of Operation Epic Fury mounts faster in Washington than the military cost mounts in Tehran. Or it can negotiate. And every indication from Iran's quiet signals to Trump's 5-day pause in energy strikes suggests that serious talks are now underway. The U.S. holds every card on this table, and its F-15s are how it's playing them. We will keep tracking every development in Operation Epic Fury, every production strike, every diplomatic signal, every drone intercept over the Strait of Hormuz. This story is not over. It may be approaching a turning point, but it is not over. That, my friends, is why what happens in the skies above Iran in the coming days and weeks matters for the entire world. A waterway that carries 20% of the planet's energy supply is being contested with fighter jets, cheap drones, and the harsh logic of industrial warfare. And right now, America's F-15s are winning that fight in a way that no one who started this conflict expected. Make sure you're subscribed to Bradley Madden so you don't miss our next update. Hit the notification bell. Share this video with someone who wants to understand what is really happening in this conflict beyond the headlines. And if you want to go deeper on what Ukraine is contributing to this fight with its drone interceptor technology, we've got you covered. Stay tuned for our next video. Thanks for watching.